Today, we are in the small seaside town of Herne Bay to tell the story of a local girl turned good who started her life here in the unassuming suburbs of Herne Bay, but ended up engaged to a sultan. It's a tale of glamour, intrigue, and ultimately tragedy. A love affair born in a London cabaret that brought the wealth of a sultan here to the southeast of England. This is the incredible story of Cissie Hill.
Born in the summer of 1913, Lydia Cecilia Hill, better known to her family and friends as Cissie Hill, her incredible story is one of humble beginnings in Canterbury, or more specifically, Herne Bay in Canterbury, Kent, England, which, if you are familiar with the area, is quite humble. Canterbury tending to be the more well-known place in this area and drawing a lot more attention than its surrounding towns and villages. And Cissie, as we've already hinted at, moved from those humble beginnings to the glamour and glitz of London cabaret and into the waiting arms of a wealthy sultan. But before all that, her story started on the 20th of July 1913 in a modest place known as Kitchener Terrace in Canterbury. She lived there for roughly 4 years before moving with her family to Herne Bay. There, Cissie and her family settled in a modest little house on King's Road.
As ever, it is freezing in Herne Bay. Last time I was here was to film the Amy Johnson video. Check that out if you haven't already. To be fair, it was worse than it is today then. It was horrible, but it's still freezing. I'm sure there are nice days in Herne Bay, just not when I'm here. I'm here today to try and accomplish a fun little challenge, because having a look at the map of basically every place that Cissie lived in Herne Bay, it seems quite doable to basically go right from the start of her life, right in the first house she grew up in, through every other place that she lived, right to where she finally ended up in Herne Bay Cemetery. So we'll see how we get on. I probably could have parked way closer to this first house. Just had to park near the beach. Well, we're almost at the first house. It's actually on quite a main drag. It's like quite near quite a lot of shops. Well, this is it. Right behind me, number 4. Very unassuming. Cissie moved into this house when she was around 4 years old. It does make you wonder whether the people that live there now know anything about the story of one of the old residents. It'd be interesting to ask them. Annoyingly, it looks like I could have parked right outside. And it was here that Cissie's creative side really blossomed, opposite a petrol station. Well, I can't imagine it was a petrol station when she was living here, but it's not exactly the most glamorous of locations to grow up in. But apparently Cissie was the one that stood out. She attended King's Road School, which I have to assume is this school behind me here, although it's not called that anymore, but it looks old enough. And she was a real standout. She was a real drama queen. In fact, she was the May Queen of her school, so she clearly stood out from an early age.
And by the time she was a teenager, she was already training as a professional dancer, performing in local shows and dazzling all that came to see. After primary school, Cissie's family moved again, though they stayed in Herne Bay.
We've officially reached the point in the day where Tom realises he completely underestimated all of his distances and is walking a very long way, and very quickly realising that he should have gone to the toilet before he left. We've done it. I've officially made it to Queensbridge Drive without wetting myself. This is the location of Cissie's second home in Herne Bay. The house was apparently called Hyacinth when she lived here, but Google Maps couldn't find a house called Hyacinth anywhere. So I am just going to do a walk up and down, not a long one because I still need the toilet, and I'm just going to see if I can spot it. Things are looking up. I've made it to the other end of Queensbridge Drive, and all of a sudden these houses have numbers and names. Chances of finding Hyacinth have just improved by about 30%. Still not saying anything though. Yeah, nothing. Made it all the way to the end of the road. No Hyacinth. I need to go this way anyway, so I'm going to go back up the other side. Just on the off chance I just wasn't looking hard enough the first time around. Yeah, I've given up hope of finding Hyacinth. What I will say is, compared to her first house, it is a lot more peaceful around here. We are much further out and much more in the suburbs at the moment. They were working their way up. They moved out from, being kind of right smack bang in the middle of things in a terraced house to a lovely, what I'm sure was lovely if I could find it, detached place out in the quiet, leafy suburbs of Herne Bay. Sorry, quick interruption. If you're enjoying what you've seen so far and you want to see more from me, then hit that subscribe button and I'll see you in the rest of my videos. Back to Cissie.
And it was a few years after moving into this third home that Cissie made a move to London. It was around 1934 when, after moving to London, Cissie joined the elite ranks of cabaret dancers at the prestigious Grosvenor House Hotel in London, which is still there today. As part of this prestigious cabaret, Cissie often stole the show with her piercing blue eyes and platinum blonde hair. But it wasn't only Cissie's skills as a dancer that won her fame and adoration. She also matched her skill with a charming personality. She performed as part of this cabaret for several seasons, clearly enjoying the attention it brought her. On the 25th of June 1934, the arrival of a certain guest at the hotel was announced in the court circular. The arrival of that guest would be of particular note to Cissie, as that man would go on to change the course of the rest of her life. That man was Ibrahim, Sultan of Johor, an incredibly wealthy sultan who had arrived at the Grosvenor House Hotel as part of that year's world tour. And it was on his second time staying at the hotel when he attended the cabaret that he first saw Cissie. Sultan himself was a bit of a charismatic playboy who liked to spend a lot of time touring the world and flaunting his reputation as something of a charismatic, wealthy enigma. And the Sultan's wallet wasn't the only massive thing about him. He was also 6'6". So not only did he stand out because of his position and wealth, but he stood out in the room simply because he was usually the biggest one in it. And he particularly enjoyed playing in London whenever he was there, and used his substantial wealth to somewhat butter up the establishment. In 1935, he gave £500,000 to the British government to bolster the defence of Singapore, and in 1940 he provided £250,000 to help aid the British government in World War II. After seeing Cissie perform and meeting her at the hotel, he became quickly enamoured with her. And it wasn't long before he made her what the term of the time was his favourite, which, yes, sounds a little bit gross now, and to be honest, it was a little bit gross. Being his favourite basically meant that she became his mistress, because the Sultan was, in fact, a married man. But I suppose with money and power comes a complete lack of any need for responsibility, so that didn't stop him spending a huge amount of money in 1934 on an incredible new Art Deco house for Cissie and her family to live in. That house was Mayfair Court, and on completion of the build, Cissie and her parents moved in, and immediately began enjoying a life of luxury that was rarely seen in her hometown. Again, wealth and power means you basically don't have to keep any secrets either, and you can do whatever you want. So their relationship was barely a secret. He showered her with gifts, he gave her jewellery that had his initials carved into them, and he often visited Cissie at this home in Herne Bay.
Walking around here, it is quite funny to think of the Sultan of Johor sneaking his way down these quiet seaside streets, surrounded by the most normal people you could possibly expect to find, sneaking off to see his, well, mistress, for want of a better word. The just extreme juxtaposition between where he came from and the life he lived and Herne Bay is, well, yeah, it's extreme. We are now off to find the pièce de résistance. We're off to find Mayfair Court, the house the Sultan paid for. And I think it's not too far from here. The Sultan had an idea to try and keep her close to home, you know? Not too far from the rest of her family and where she grew up. So, I think we're almost there. Should probably stick out like a sore thumb. It's not exactly in keeping with the rest of the architecture around here. And I can see not Mayfair Court to begin with, but one of the properties alongside it that was designed along a similar idea. Very Art Deco. Let's go have a look. I'm going to try not to hang out for too long here because obviously this is somebody's house and don't want to invade people's privacy too much, so we'll get a few shots and then we'll move on. But this is where she and her family lived for the last years of her life. As lavish and, you know, expensive at the time, and I'm sure very fashionable at the time as it was, it's not really my cup of tea. In fact, I think I prefer there's a house opposite and it's got an incredible, almost like an observatory. I'll show you a shot of it in a sec. And I can see why they picked here to build, because you are right at the top of the hill. It's called Clifftop Gardens for a reason. And there are some stunning views over the sea. And then you're sadly reminded of the unfortunate dilapidation of a lot of English coastal towns when you see properties like this just run down. Now, the Sultan had this house built for Cissie around 1934, 1935. At the very least, she was living in it by 1935. Wasn't that many years previously that she'd been living in number 4 King's Road. To go from that in the matter of a few years, so she was so young, it reminds you how young she was, how quickly she moved up in the world. Just shows you, you know, what the right connections can do for you, or what wooing the right guy can do for you.
And the unconventional relationship did draw some attention and some criticism, which often included the public, but sometimes included British colonial officials as well. And the Sultan was somewhat used to getting in trouble. And though to us now, this may seem like just a sordid affair, and you would probably feel sorry for his wife, but at the time, and as a Muslim, he was technically allowed up to 4 wives at any one time. And though in his life he did actually have a total of 6 wives, it would seem that he never actually managed to ever fill the whole quota of 4 at any one time, because most of his wives either ended up dead or divorced. A little bit of a similarity to one King of England, Henry VIII there, although I don't think he ever actually had any of his wives executed. So this relationship continued. The Sultan continued to travel the world and get up to who knows what, whilst keeping Cissie in the new house that he'd built her in Herne Bay. But then in 1937, an event took place that drew somewhat more attention to their relationship than they were used to. Thieves broke into Mayfair Court, and £5,000 worth of jewellery was stolen from Cissie's bedroom. Now, that sounds like quite a lot of jewellery to me today in 2025. But we have to remember, this is the 1930s. So if we were to price that £5,000 worth of jewellery in today's money, it would come close to around £290,000 worth of jewellery. And of course, as we've already touched on, some of that jewellery had the Sultan's initials on. The relationship was exposed in a way it had not been before, and a media sensation began. And it began to be rumoured that the couple was secretly engaged. Those rumours started after in 1938, Cissie was pictured wearing what looked to be an engagement ring. Although political pressures and pressures from the British government and his side made a union particularly unlikely, and let's just say people weren't a fan of the idea of the Sultan of Johor marrying a cabaret dancer. Those political pressures came to bear in a particularly diplomatic way, when British colonial staff in Singapore, disgusted at the idea of a cabaret dancer becoming the bride of a sultan, put immense pressure on him to end their engagement. British communities in Malaysia and Singapore were outraged by all of this, because his newly discovered relationship with Cissie came on the back of a previous marriage to a woman named Helen Wilson, who was a widow nearly 16 years younger than him. Let's just say they weren't too happy with his playboy lifestyle. And when the news about Cissie came out, they began turning down invitations to events and official functions, as well as essentially ostracizing him completely. The Sultan, of course, was not happy with this situation and lashed out as a playboy sultan would. He immediately fired all of his British employees, and then he planted shrubs all over one of their favourite golf courses. But ultimately, in the end, politics and diplomacy won out, and he did have to break off the engagement. But he later claimed that that made no change to their relationship, and their relationship stayed as strong as ever. So the relationship stayed pretty much exactly the same, he just wasn't allowed to marry her. Their relationship may have survived political crisis, but what it wouldn't survive is the unavoidable tragedy that was just around the corner. Obviously, 1938 was around the time the world was thrown into the chaos and devastation of war. And that war tragically came to Canterbury on the 11th of October 1940. Cissie and a friend had left Herne Bay in the morning to head to Canterbury and hit the high street to do a little shopping. Her and her friend Peggy Clark had been shopping in a few different places before they split up, and Cissie went to a furrier's to see if she could buy a new fur rug. And as Cissie was browsing the products, a German air raid struck. Bombs dropped that were almost certainly targeting Canterbury Cathedral missed their mark, and instead landed on the high street and directly on the shop that Cissie was in. And she was killed instantly. 6 people were killed, and many more were injured. And all in all, it took 2 days for the dead to be removed from the rubble. At the age of just 27 years old, with so much success and so much still ahead of her, her life was ended just like that. The devastation and the injuries to Cissie was so bad that she could only be identified by the jewellery she was wearing. And of course, that jewellery was given to her by the Sultan. And it was in fact Cissie's own mother and the Sultan himself who came to identify the body. Now, despite all of his, let's say, terrible habits and sexual proclivities, the Sultan did seem genuinely heartbroken. And it was he who commissioned the elaborate marble monument that stands as her gravestone to this day. And later in his life, he did go on to say that one of his biggest regrets was never actually marrying Cissie. Though having said that, 1 month after she died, he married a Romanian woman, and that's married 1 month after, which means he probably met her a couple of weeks afterwards. He was still offering his condolences to Cissie's parents whilst seeing this Romanian girl. Although there have been some suggestions that he only went to offer his condolences to collect some of the jewellery that he gave to Cissie. Again, different rules for sultans. And, as you may expect, he was questioned by some when this happened. The Daily Mirror asked him what was going on. He said, "It is for the future that I want to live. Let's not refer to anything else." He also told the Sunday Pictorial, "I prefer to forget the past. It is for the future that I want to live." The Sultan himself died at the ripe old age of 85 in 1959, And where did he die? At the Grosvenor House Hotel. And Time magazine said he had passed his last years quietly, watching TV, going to the theatre, enjoying the company of his sixth wife, Sultana Marcella, which kind of sounds like an Aldi brand of raisins, and his adored 8-year-old daughter, Princess Miriam. At Cissie's funeral, there were many, many mourners, including the Sultan himself. And the Sultan's wreath was laid in the grave with Cissie. And the marble monument, paid for by the Sultan, was blue and white, just like her home at Mayfair Court.
All right, we have one last place to visit, and that is Lydia Cecilia Hill's final resting place at Herne Bay Cemetery, with one little interesting stop off on the way. We have come across a particularly interesting spot here. Just across the road from me, we see some very standard looking 70s apartments. They did not used to be there. Obviously, most places didn't used to be there. Somebody built them at some point. But what used to be where these flats behind me are was a church. And that is where Cissie's funeral took place. It's interesting. If I didn't already know that there used to be a church there, I think you do get a kind of there's a churchy vibe to the place. Just the layout of the road as well feels like it was clearly designed around there being a church here. I wonder if the wall that's here as well is at least, part of the original wall around the church. Well, it looks like it's old enough to have been the original. I'll have to check the pictures. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is still the original wall that they left behind here, because you can still see the remains of where the iron railings on top of the wall were chopped off. This is 100% the original wall. It's fascinating. I mean, I'll be honest, it's a shame they knocked it down, because I think I prefer a lovely church to what we have now. At some point in the 70s, they decided they needed living space more than another church, and fair enough, I get that, but it's always a shame to see a lovely building destroyed and replaced with a block of flats. All right, since I recorded that last bit, I've been walking for about 40 minutes and I'm still nowhere near the car. I should have parked closer. But I did find a public toilet, so there's a little win. It was horrible though. It was grim. It's all uphill. All right, hey. I made it to the car. Well, I have not learned my lesson and have once again parked a country mile away from where I need to be. What I'm hoping is that, like Mayfair Court, I should be able to find Cissie's grave relatively easily. What we're looking for is a huge marble monument surrounded by its own little fence. But what I'm realizing now is quite how big this cemetery is. It's a little bit bigger than I thought it was going to be. So, as usual, wish me luck. I'm going to go this way. No sign yet, but I'll tell you what I'm not seeing. I'm not seeing that many graves with their own little fence, so that's something. It's actually big enough that there are cars driving around in here. I could have parked here, though I don't know about you. I'd like to try and be as respectful and unobtrusive as possible when looking around a graveyard, and so it wouldn't feel quite right driving in here, I don't think. Maybe if I was coming in here to see, a family member, I'll happily walk for this. Oh, we have a small fenced off one here, but not quite what we're looking for. I think this one's been here for a little bit longer and has seen better days. And if If Cissie's is still in reasonable condition, it should look like that one, but white. I might need to look up Annie Hood, because this monument is incredible. Got another possible Cissie up here. If it is, it's in better days, but I think it might be. Here we go. Here she is. I'll tell you one thing. I'm glad I had the knowledge that I was looking for a small fenced monument rather than just a white marble one, because you can still see glimpses of the white marble, but this thing hasn't been white for some time, which is a shame. I don't know how hard it is to maintain white marble. When she was first laid to rest here, this probably looked incredible, and it definitely stands out. I mean, she is at the very top of the cemetery, looking straight back down the hill and over Herne Bay. She really does have some pretty prime real estate up here, and it's quite peaceful. Can't hear much other than the occasional squawk of a seagull and the dull drone of the A299 off in the distance. Well, hey, that wouldn't have been here when she was buried, so it would have been more peaceful then. The inscription itself says, "In loving memory of Lydia Cissie Hill, born 20th July 1913, died 11th of October 1940. This monument has been erected by a devoted friend, somewhere back of the sunset, where loveliness never dies. She dwells in the land of glory, neath the blue and cold of the skies. And we who have lived with and loved her, whose passing has caused us tears, will cherish her memory forever, down through the passing years." And on that note, this is probably a good place to end. She lived a very short life, but she lived that life to its fullest. She squeezed in what most people don't experience in an entire lifetime into 20-something years. But unfortunately, it ended tragically, as so many lives did during World War II. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this incredible story and you enjoyed finding out a little bit more about somebody you've possibly not heard of before. It's a really interesting story, and these are the kinds of possibly unknown stories I like sharing with everybody. So on that note, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.